Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to The Well-Told Tale. Every week we bring you the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. Today we return to the classic science fiction story The First Men in the Moon by H.G. Wells. Our narrator, Mr. Bedford, and the eccentric scientist Mr. Cavor are now in their spaceship heading for the moon. It's time to pull up a chair, relax and enjoy part 3 of The First Men in the Moon by H.G. Wells. 5. The Journey to the Moon. Presently, Cavor extinguished the light. He said we had not overmuch energy stored, and that what we had we must economize for reading. For a time, whether it was long or short I do not know, there was nothing but blank darkness. A question floated up out of the void. "How are we pointing?" I said. "What is our direction?" "We are flying away from the Earth at a tangent, and as the moon is near her third quarter, we are going somewhere towards her. I will open a blind." Came a click, and then a window in the outer case yawned open. The sky outside was as black as the darkness within the sphere, but the shape of the open window was marked by an infinite number of stars. Those who have only seen the starry sky from the Earth cannot imagine its appearance when the vague, half-luminous veil of our air has been withdrawn. The stars we see on Earth are the mere scattered survivors that penetrate our misty atmosphere. But now at last I could realize the meaning of the hosts of heaven. Stranger things we were presently to see, but that airless, star-dusted sky, of all things, I think that will be one of the last I shall forget. The little window vanished with a click. Another beside it snapped open and instantly closed, then a third, and for a moment I had to close my eyes because of the blinding splendour of the waning moon. For a space I had to stare at Cavor and the white-lit things about me to season my eyes to light again, before I could turn them towards that pallid glare. 4 windows were open in order that the gravitation of the moon might act upon all the substances in our sphere. I found I was no longer floating freely in space, but that my feet were resting on the glass in the direction of the moon. The blankets and cases of provisions were also creeping slowly down the glass, and presently came to rest so as to block out a portion of the view. It seemed to me, of course, that I looked down when I looked at the moon. On Earth, down means earthward, the way things fall, and up, the reverse direction. Now the pull of gravitation was towards the moon, and for all I knew, to the contrary, our Earth was overhead. And of course, when all the Cavorite blinds were closed, down was towards the centre of our sphere, and up towards its outer wall. It was curiously unlike earthly experience, too, to have the light coming up to one. On Earth, light falls from above or comes slanting down sideways, but here it came from beneath our feet, and to see our shadows we had to look up. At first it gave me a sort of vertigo to stand only on thick glass and look down upon the moon through hundreds of thousands of miles of vacant space, but this sickness passed very speedily, and then the splendour of the sight. The reader may imagine it best if he will lie on the ground some warm summer's night and look between his upraised feet at the moon, but for some reason, probably because the absence of air made it so much more luminous, the moon seemed already considerably larger than it does from Earth. The minutest details of its surface were acutely clear, and since we did not see it through air, its outline was bright and sharp. There was no glow or halo about it, and the stardust that covered the sky came right to its very margin, and marked the outline of its unilluminated part. And as I stood and stared at the moon between my feet, that perception of the impossible that had been with me off and on ever since our start returned again with tenfold conviction. "Cavor," I said, "this takes me queerly. Those companies we were going to run and all that about minerals. Well, I don't see 'em here." "No," said Cavor, "but you'll get over that. I suppose I'm made to turn right side up again. Still, this, for a moment, I could half believe there never was a world. That copy of Lloyd's News might help you." I stared at the paper for a moment, then held it above the level of my face, and found I could read it quite easily. I struck a column of mean little advertisements. "A gentleman of private means is willing to lend money," I read. I knew that gentleman. Then somebody eccentric wanted to sell a cutaway bicycle, quite new and cost £15, for £5, and a lady in distress wished to dispose of some fish knives and forks. A wedding present, at a great sacrifice. No doubt some simple soul was sagely examining those knives and forks, and another triumphantly riding off on that bicycle, and a third trustfully consulting that benevolent gentleman of means even as I read. I laughed and let the paper drift from my hand. "Are we visible from the Earth?" I asked. "Why?" "I knew someone who was rather interested in astronomy. It occurred to me that it would be rather odd if my friend chanced to be looking through some telescope. It would need to be the most powerful telescope on Earth, even now, to see us as the minutest speck." For a time I stared in silence at the moon. One feels that infinitely more than one ever did on Earth. People, perhaps... People, he exclaimed. "No, banish all that. Think yourself a sort of ultra-Arctic voyager exploring the desolate places of space. Look at it." He waved his hand at the shining whiteness below. "It's dead. Dead. Vast extinct volcanoes, lava wildernesses, tumbled wastes of snow or frozen carbonic acid or frozen air, and everywhere landslip seams and cracks and gulfs. Nothing happens. Men have watched this planet systematically with telescopes for over 200 years. How much change do you think they have seen?" "None. They have traced 2 indisputable landslips, a doubtful crack, and 1 slight periodic change of colour, and that is all." "I didn't even know they'd traced that." "Oh, yes, but as for people—" "Oh, by the way," I asked, "how small a thing will the biggest telescopes show upon the moon?" "One could see a fair-sized church. One could certainly see any towns or buildings or anything like the handiwork of men. There might perhaps be insects, something in the way of ants, for example, so that they could hide in deep burrows from lunar light, or some sort of new creatures that have no earthly parallel. That is the most probable thing, if we are to find life there at all. Think of the difference in conditions. Life must fit itself to a day as long as 14 earthly days, a cloudless sun blaze of 14 days, and then a night of equal length, growing ever colder and colder under those cold, sharp stars. In the night, there must be cold, the ultimate cold, absolute zero, 273 degrees centigrade, below the earthly freezing point. Whatever life there is must hibernate through that, and rise again each day." He mused. "One can imagine something worm-like," he said, "taking its air solid as an earthworm swallows earth, or thick-skinned monsters." "By the by," I said, "why didn't we bring a gun?" He did not answer that question. "No," he concluded, "we just have to go. We shall see when we get there." I remembered something. "Of course, there's my minerals, anyhow," I said, "whatever the conditions may be." Presently he told me he wished to alter our course a little by letting the earth tug at us for a while. He was going to open 1 earthward blind for 30 seconds. He warned me that it would make my head swim, and advised me to extend my hands against the glass to break my fall. I did as he directed, and thrust my feet against the bales of food cases and air cylinders to prevent their falling upon me. Then, with a click, the window flew open. I fell clumsily upon hands and face, and saw for a moment between my black extended fingers our Mother Earth, a planet in a downward sky. We were still very near. Cavor told me the distance was perhaps 800 miles, and the huge terrestrial disk filled all heaven. But already it was plain to see that the world was a globe. The land below us was in twilight and vague, but westward the vast grey stretches of the Atlantic shone like molten silver under the receding day. I think I recognised the cloud-dimmed coastlines of France and Spain and the south of England, and then, with a click, the shutter closed again, and I found myself in a state of extraordinary confusion, sliding slowly over the smooth glass. When at last things settled themselves in my mind again, it seemed quite beyond question that the moon was down and under my feet, and that the earth was somewhere away on the level of the horizon, the earth that had been down to me and my kindred since the beginning of things. So slight were the exertions required of us, so easy did the practical annihilation of our weight make all we had to do, that the necessity for taking refreshment did not occur to us for nearly 6 hours by Cavor's chronometer after our start. I was amazed at that lapse of time. Even then I was satisfied with very little. Cavor examined the apparatus for absorbing carbonic acid and water and pronounced it to be in satisfactory order, our consumption of oxygen having been extraordinarily slight. And our talk being exhausted for the time, and there being nothing further for us to do, we gave way to a curious drowsiness that had come upon us, and spreading our blankets on the bottom of the sphere in such a manner as to shut out most of the moonlight, wished each other good night, and almost immediately fell asleep. And so, sleeping and sometimes talking and reading a little, and at times eating, although without any keenness of appetite, but for the most part in a sort of quiescence that was neither waking nor slumber, we fell through a space of time that had neither night nor day in it, silently, softly, and swiftly, down towards the moon. 6. The landing on the moon. I remember how one day Cavor suddenly opened 6 of our shutters and blinded me so that I cried aloud at him. The whole area was moon, a stupendous scimitar of white dawn with its edge hacked out by notches of darkness, the crescent shore of an ebbing tide of darkness, out of which peaks and pinnacles came glittering into the blaze of the sun. I take it the reader has seen pictures or photographs of the moon, and that I need not describe the broader features of that landscape, those spacious ring-like ranges vaster than any terrestrial mountains, their summits shining in the day, their shadows harsh and deep, the great disordered plains, the ridges, hills and craterlets, all passing at last from a blazing illumination into a common mystery of black. Athwart this world, we were flying scarcely 100 miles above its crests and pinnacles, and now we could see what no eye on earth will ever see, that under the blaze of the day, the harsh outlines of the rocks and ravines of the plains and crater floor grew grey and indistinct under a thickening haze, that the white of their lit surfaces broke into lumps and patches, and broke again and shrank and vanished, and that here and there strange tints of brown and olive grew and spread. But little time we had for watching then, for now we had come to the real danger of our journey. We had to drop ever closer to the moon as we spun about it, to slacken our pace and watch our chance, until at last we could dare to drop upon its surface. For Cavor, that was a time of intense exertion. For me, it was an anxious inactivity. I seemed perpetually to be getting out of his way. He leapt about the sphere from point to point with an agility that would have been impossible on Earth. He was perpetually opening and closing the Cavorite windows, making calculations, consulting his chronometer by means of the glow lamp during those last eventful hours. For a long time, we had all our windows closed and hung silently in darkness, hurling through space. Then he was feeling for the shutter studs, and suddenly 4 windows were open. I staggered and covered my eyes, drenched and scorched and blinded by the unaccustomed splendour of the sun beneath my feet. Then again the shutters snapped, leaving my brain spinning in a darkness that pressed against the eyes, and after that I floated in another vast black silence. Then Cavor switched on the electric light and told me he proposed to bind all our luggage together with the blankets about it against the concussion of our descent. We did this with our windows closed, because in that way our goods arranged themselves naturally at the centre of the sphere. That too was a strange business. We 2 men floating loose in that spherical sphere and packing and pulling ropes. Imagine it if you can. No up nor down, and every effort resulting in unexpected movements. Now I would be pressed against the glass with the full force of Cavor's thrust. Now I would be kicking helplessly in a void. Now the star of the electric light would be overhead, now underfoot. Now Cavor's feet would float up before my eyes, and now we would be crossways to each other. But at last our goods were safely bound together in a big soft bale, all except 2 blankets with head holes that we were to wrap about ourselves. Then, for a flash, Cavor opened a window moonward, and we saw that we were dropping towards a huge central crater with a number of minor craters grouped in a sort of cross about it. And then again Cavor flung our little sphere open to the scorching, blinding sun. I think he was using the sun's attraction as a brake. "Cover yourself with a blanket," he cried, thrusting himself from me, and for a moment I did not understand. Then I hauled the blanket from beneath my feet and got it about me and over my head and eyes. Abruptly he closed the shutters again, snapped one open again and closed it, and then suddenly began snapping them all open, each safely into its steel roller. Then came a jar, and then we were rolling over and over, bumping against the glass and against the big bale of our luggage, and clutching at each other, and outside some white substance splashed as if we were rolling down a slope of snow, over clutch, bump, over... Came a thud, and I was half buried under the bale of our possessions, and for a space everything was still. Then I could hear Cavor puffing and grunting, and the snapping of a shutter in its sash. I made an effort, thrust back our blanket-wrapped luggage, and emerged from beneath it. Our open windows were just visible as a deeper black set with stars. We were still alive, and we were lying in the darkness of the shadow of the wall of the great crater into which we have fallen. We sat, getting our breath again, and feeling the bruises on our limbs. I don't think either of us had had a very clear expectation of such rough handling as we had received. I struggled painfully to my feet. "And now," said I, "to look at the landscape of the moon. But it's tremendously dark, Cavor." The glass was dewy, and as I spoke I wiped at it with my blanket. "We're half an hour or so beyond the day," he said. "We must wait." It was impossible to distinguish anything. We might have been in a sphere of steel for all that we could see. My rubbing with the blanket simply smeared the glass, and as fast as I wiped it, it became opaque again with freshly condensed moisture, mixed with an increasing quantity of blanket hairs. Of course, I ought not to have used the blanket. In my efforts to clear the glass, I slipped upon the damp surface and hurt my shin against one of the oxygen cylinders that protruded from our bale. The thing was exasperating. It was absurd. Here we were, just arrived upon the moon, amidst we knew not what wonders, and all we could see was the grey and streaming wall of the bubble in which we had come. "Oh, confound it," I said, "but at this rate we might have stopped at home." And I squatted on the bale and shivered and drew my blanket closer about me. Abruptly, the moisture turned to spangles and fronds of frost. "Can you reach the electric heater?" said Cavor. "Yes, that black knob, or we shall freeze." I did not wait to be told twice. "And now," said I, "what are we to do?" "Wait," he said. "Wait? Of course. We shall have to wait until our air gets warm again, and then this glass will clear. We can't do anything until then. It's night here yet, and we must wait for the day to overtake us. Meanwhile, don't you feel hungry?" For a space I did not answer him, but sat fretting. I turned reluctantly from the smeared puzzle of the glass and stared at his face. "Yes," I said, "I am hungry. I feel somehow enormously disappointed. I had expected... I don't know what I had expected, but not this." I summoned my philosophy and rearranged my blanket about me, sat down on the bale again and began my first meal on the moon. I don't think I finished it. I forget. Presently, first in patches, then running rapidly together into wider spaces, came the clearing of the glass, came the drawing of the misty veil that hid the moon world from our eyes. We peered out upon the landscape of the moon. And welcome back. I hope you enjoyed part 3 of The First Men in the Moon. If you'd like to support The Well-Told Tale as we make these classics available for free to everyone, thank you. The best way to do that is through my Patreon page. There's a link in the description. I'll be back next week with part 4 of the story. I hope you can join me.